The United States have qualified for the 2020 Tokyo Olympics. They are one of 8 teams to do so. 4 teams can still punch their ticket in the summer affair. It begins July 22nd, Julie, and when it does, the defending champions, Germany, will not be there. That's because it's only a 12-team tournament. It's a rather small affair, isn't it, Julie?
Too small, way too small. And you look at it, the men have 16 teams. The women only have 12. No Germany, as you just pointed out. No France, who lost in the quarterfinals to the United States, so they're out of it. They didn't fall into the top 3 of Europe, which the World Cup counts as the qualifiers for the Olympics for UEFA. So I think it's crazy. I think it's a shame you don't have the defending Olympic champions and one of the best teams easily in the world in France. And it doesn't, if you expand the field to 16 like the men, it doesn't add any games, actually. Instead of just 3 groups of 4 and then going to a quarterfinal, you have 4 groups of 4 going to a quarterfinal. So it's still 6 games total, which I know is a big issue because the Olympics are a tighter time schedule than a World Cup. They run them in about 2.5, 3 weeks versus a full month for a World Cup. But to go to 16 is not adding any games. It's just adding one more group. I think it makes a world of sense, and I think they need to do that.
Specifically, the difference, so the fact that there's a difference between the women's tournament where you see 12 teams and the fact that the men get 16. How does that make you feel?
How does it always make me feel, Savvy? That there needs to be more attention on the women's game. And especially because these events, World Cups, Olympics, qualifiers for them, Euros for UEFA, these are things that are programming for countries that don't typically have programming. And on the women's side, it's another opportunity for them to invest in the women's game, to invest in their women's team, to invest in young girls playing in their countries. Because we still know, even though we've seen this untapped potential on the women's side finally being tapped into, as we saw in this last World Cup. There were over 1 billion people who were watching this last Women's World Cup, and the numbers skyrocketing in terms of participation numbers globally for women. There's still a lot of countries who are unwilling to invest, and this gives them another opportunity, another chance to invest if you can have 16 teams going to the Olympics. And it only seems right. There should be more teams from Europe going so that you're not in a situation where 2 of the best in the world are left out of really the top competition outside of the Women's World Cup.
Julie, we've touched on it a few times. What do you think of the fact that UEFA uses the World Cup as its Olympic qualifier?
I think the challenge is there's not a lot of space in the calendar and in the FIFA calendar to actually fit in a whole nother competition of qualifiers. You know, I've complained in the past that they shouldn't use the World Cup, and you get pushback from players in Europe who say, well, when are we going to have those? When are you going to add it into the calendar? There's just no time between their professional games with their clubs, between their Euro qualifiers, which are happening in 2021, but the qualifiers, the actual European Championship for women is 2021 in England, but the qualifiers are happening right now. And so they said there's just no time to fit them in. And that's why, again, I go back to, so make that pool 16, which it should be, and you could still use the World Cup as your marker, but you get the rest of that group in that deserves to be in with the 16.
Well, it'll be 12 teams this time around. Let's take another look at the 8 that have already qualified. Of course, you've got the hosts, Japan, you got Brazil as well, New Zealand, Great Britain, who will be, of course, earning the spot by England in the semifinals, Sweden, Netherlands, also from Europe, U.S., Canada. A couple more teams to come out of Asia. Australia will probably be one of those teams. They could threaten for a medal. And then one team out of Africa. The second-place team out of Africa will face Chile, who were second place out of South America. The winner of that playoff will also get a spot as well. Julie, as we look at this list, I think most people would agree that the U.S. are favorites. I want to take it a step further, though. Do you think they're overwhelming favorites in this tournament?
Definitely favorites. Overwhelming is tough because, as we know, no one has won a Women's World Cup and then gone on the very next year to win the Olympics because it's such a hard turnaround. We've talked about this before, but bears repeating. When you win a World Cup, as the women just did this summer, and in the fashion they did, and you got the attention on them, and the eyeballs, and the sponsorships, and the overwhelming fan love. I mean, there's just a ton of attention on this team, and it's draining. It's physically draining. It's mentally draining. They realize that they only have a small window to actually make some money and capitalize on it, so they're busy doing a lot of sponsor appearances. And so they're tired. And I think that's the challenge for any team is how do you balance it? How do you balance it where you can rev up again? I think it helps when you have a new coach and a new voice in Vlatko Andonovski and a new approach to the game coming in. That brings some freshness. But you could see it in the Olympic qualifiers. They weren't where they need to be yet. Mind you, it's January, but they're tired as well. They haven't taken a break. So it is tough, but they are for sure the favorites, especially with France and Germany not in this tournament.
You mentioned no France, you mentioned no Germany. Who worries you most then of the teams that have qualified?
I actually think Great Britain, you look at that conglomerate of countries. There's 4 they could pull from. So it's not just England, which we know on its own is good, but you also have Wales, you have Scotland, you have Northern Ireland. And you look at some of the players that Phil Neville will be able to pull from, Kim Little, Erin Cuthbert, Rachel Corsie, Scottish players, Jessica Fishlock, who we all know from our days with NWSL and playing professionally here, who's Welsh. So it's not just this incredible England squad. You have all of Great Britain that he can pull from. So I think they are going to be a force to reckon with for the Olympics, for sure.
Interesting to hear you say Great Britain. We asked the same question of Mallory Pugh a couple months ago. Hercules Gomez did at the ESPN LA studio. She had a slightly different answer, and I think we've played this before, but I want to listen to it once again.
What is the top competition for you guys in the Olympic?
Yeah. I personally think it's going to be Japan, just because my experience, I feel like their team, they were kind of in a rebuilding phase these last few years, and I played against their U20 team, and by far it was the best Japan team I've ever played with at the youth side. And so now to have those girls on the national team, and it's going to be in their home country, I think it'd be obviously fun to play against Japan, but it'd be very hard because that U20, that U20 team was dirty.
You mean dirty as in good?
Dirty as in good.
Julia, you had home field advantage in the Olympics in '96. You had it the World Cup in '99. I'd imagine there's some good and some bad to it, some positive, but also some pressure. What is the actual impact it could have on a Japanese team that we remember from the last World Cup didn't get really deep into the tournament and was very, very young?
Yeah, super young. I think they had 17 players on that 2019 Women's World Cup roster who were in their first World Cup. And to Mal Pugh's point, I mean, we've seen how good they are at the youth level. They just won their first ever under 20 Women's World Cup in 2018. And they have a ton of young talent that's coming through. But are they there yet? And are they experienced enough to handle the pressure of hosting the Olympics and playing at home? Because for all the greatness that comes with playing in front of your crowd and the excitement and the energy, there also is the other side of that coin, which is it's a ton of pressure. It's a ton of pressure, especially in a country that's still trying to build its women's soccer program and attract fans and attract eyeballs. And they know that an Olympic gold medal could help do just that. But I don't think they're there yet. I still think they're too young. I think that they don't, and they haven't shown that they can replace the likes of Himari Sawa, who was a legendary Japanese player for them, helped them win the 2011 Women's World Cup, the only title they've won. So we've kind of seen the rise and stall of Japan. And yes, they're rebuilding right now, but do they have enough? They have a young kid, Sari Takarada, who was the silver boot bronze ball winner of the under 20 Women's World Cup that they won. But is she going to be, she's only 20 years old, is she going to be enough? Do they have enough talent on the finishing end to actually make a difference in this Olympics. I'm not sure they're there yet.
What a matchup it would be, U.S. and Japan at the Olympics. We might get it there. We know that we will get it at the upcoming She Believes Cup, which begins March 5th.
Well, thank you very much for watching ESPN on YouTube. For more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app. And for live streaming, premium content, and let's not forget as well, ESPN FC 7 days a week. Subscribe to ESPN+.